ScreencastOne by Jasmine Ham. Learning disabilities. Learning disability, or LD, is a term currently used to describe a group of neurological conditions that interfere with a person's learning. Under the umbrella called LD, there are disorders related to listening, speaking, reading, reasoning, and mathematical calculation. Individuals with LD have intelligence in the near average, average, or above average range. Because these individuals do not appear to be different, difficulties are not expected. The impact of conditions may range from mild to severe. This is the timeline of the history of learning disabilities. Notably, in 1963, a formation of association with children with learning disabilities was created. And then in 1975, Congress passes the PL 94-142 Act. In 1990, Congress passes Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, and then it was reauthorized in 1997. 5 leaders in the field of LD. In 1937, Samuel Orton, a neuropathologist, used a term called streptosymbolia to describe a problem he observed in children with reading difficulties, namely the reversal of symbols such as B and D, or words such as saw and was. He thought that this might be caused by the failure of one of the hemispheres of the brain to establish dominance over the other, which he assumed resulted in mirror images of words and symbols. He noted that there may be a continuum of reading disability ranging from mild cases to severe cases, and after him was named the Orton Dyslexia Society. And then Samuel Orton, Anna Gillingham, Bessie Stillman, Romalda Spalding, and Grace Fernald responded to the need by developing alternative methods to teach students who couldn't learn to read by memorizing sight words. And another notable person is B.F. Skinner, who his research on animal and human behavior created a different approach, a behavior modification which became very popular in education during the 1960s. So Public Law 94-142 guaranteed that each handicapped age 3 to 21 would receive a free and appropriate education in the least restrictive environment possible. Children with LD, this meant that children with LD were to be educated in a regular classroom unless the nature and severity of their disability was so great that it would be demonstrated that they could not make progress in regular classes. And then Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 addresses issues that have to do with other individuals with special needs. Under 504 is based on having impairment, which substantially limits one or more of major life activities such as caring for oneself, performing manual tasks, walking, seeing, hearing, speaking, breathing, learning, and working. So causal factors versus incidence factors. Causal factors may be familiar factors, difficulty in pregnancy, delivery, or prematurity, certain prenatal conditions, postnatal or birth trauma, or early exposure to harmful things such as lead. And then incidence. In the United States, 20% or more of students have trouble learning to read. Many children are evaluated and found to have a learning disability, but they do not qualify for special education services because they do not show a severe discrepancy between ability or intelligence and performance. So what constitutes a severe discrepancy varies from state to state. Primary characteristics of LD. One indication of LD is a perceptual deficit. Another indication is problems with reading, which appears in deficits in phonological processing. Co-occurring conditions. Attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or ADHD, co-occurs with LD in approximately 1 out of every 3 individuals identified for special education services. Another is conduct disorder, which is sometimes co-occurring conditions with ADHD. In addition to the primary symptoms of inattention and impulsivity, those with CD exhibit a lack of respect for the right of others. And along with that is Tourette syndrome, which is an inherited neurological disorder. The condition is characterized by involuntary motor tics or vocal tics, or both of these type of tics. Next is programs and settings in the least restrictive environment. So essentially, for LD children from 3 to 5 years old, programs are available through the state's local early intervention team. Parents can be referred to these programs through their pediatricians, daycare providers, or simply going online. A least restrictive environment, meaning that they can be in a regular classroom. So attributes. Anatomy and function of the brain. As we can see, the frontal lobe is involved in problem solving. The parietal lobe is involved in sensory, such as taste, touch, pressure, and pain. The occipital lobe is part of visual information. The cerebellum, balance and coordination. And the temporal lobe, hearing and language. So those are the functions of the brain. Implication of brain injury on learning. So a brain injury, such as in this picture, a baseball hitting the brain. Primary force of impact hits the head. Secondary force of impact. As the head is hit, the force of the primary impact pushes the brain to hit the back of the skull, causing secondary impact. This can cause learning disabilities, as research shows. Brain and autism. Recent studies have shown that there are structural differences of the brains of children with autism. Autism is strongly heritable, meaning that it follows a genetic pathway. One study found an abnormally large brain volume in the white cerebellum matter and enlarged cortical gray matter as early as 2 years of age in boys with autism. ADHD in the brain. So, caused by the brain's inconsistent processing of sensory input. That's what ADHD is, pretty much. Sometimes a message is sent through the nervous system and action is taken, but other times the message in the central nervous system receives are not processed in an organized fashion. Structural anomalies in some areas of the brain of children with ADHD seem to function in different manners from those in control groups, and the biochemistry of the brain may explain some symptoms of ADHD. In children with hyperactivity as a major component, evidence shows that there is more excitatory chemicals in their brain. Biochemical influences on learning. Biochemical irregularities can be influenced by pharmaceuticals, substances we eat, and things we drink. Our cells respond on a chemical level to sugar, caffeine, and even chocolate. Our bodies and brains, all the way to the cellular level, are also influenced by stimulants. Stimulants are used in the treatment of HD and are thought to affect the speed at which information is processed and the strength of these connections between neurons. The stimulant forces the message to be sent across neurons, and this may help people with ADHD who may not have the same neurochemical passageways. Stimulant medication may suppress non-compliant, disruptive, and aggressive behavior seen in some ADHD individuals. Next, research on memory. So, in order to learn, students must be able to attend to stimuli, encode information about that stimuli, integrate and store data in memory, and be able to retrieve the data as they are needed. We know that students with LD may have deficits in one or more of these areas. So how can educators help students with LD improve memory? Visual support, such as writing information on the board, having students take notes, greatly facilitate learning because most auditory information is lost from short-term memory within a few seconds. Teachers can also help the students by making connections between information and their prior experiences. If we connect new information to old information, is more likely to be remembered. Research on metacognition. Metacognition refers to the knowledge and control individuals have over their own thinking. Important factors to help thinking and learning is note-taking, verbal self-mediation, mnemonics, and mapping/graphic organizers. Phonological processing problems. Phonologically based reading disabilities are characterized by difficulties acquiring alphabetic or phonetic reading strategies. Children who have difficulty learning to read tend to be slow to grasp the concept that letters have and slow to encode those sounds. After the child knows the sound, he may be slow to recall the correct sound. These children are slow to acquire sight words, and these children require more time to develop adequate decoding and reading fluency. Next, we're going to talk about the law. So this is the timeline of the law for LD. I talked about a few of these already. So in 1975, the Education of All Handicapped Children. In 1990 and 2000, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. Section 504 came next, and then finally in 2000, No Child Left Behind. Parental rights in the law. So there's a number of things. So these are all the parental rights. 1, require confidential treatment of the children's records. Only a limited group of people within the school should have access to them. 2, review and inspect records. 3, have copies of all records and any documentation regarding their child on file with the school. 4, release records to non-school personnel when permission is obtained by the school in writing. 5, be notified in advance, which is 10 days, of any meeting pertaining to the child. This could be an IEP. They may bring anyone they wish to the meeting, and they may tape or record meetings. 6, request an assessment for their child. 7, be apprised of the assessment tools to be used and have the child assessed in his own language. Continued. 8, request an independent evaluation at public expense if they do not agree with the district's evaluation. 9, have input into the development of the individual education program, meaning at the IEP meeting they have input. 10, refuse services or placement in special education. 11, have an independent, fully paid private school placement if it is deemed necessary to meet the child's needs. And 12, request to have a fair hearing if disagreements arise in regard to identification, placement, or services. Next, we have the IDEA versus Section 504. So for IDEA, the purpose is federal institute to ensure appropriate services for disabled children, while Section 504 is the civil rights law to protect the rights of individuals with handicaps and programs that receive federal financing. So the scope for IDEA is all school-age children who fall into these categories, and then there's a list, and I'll name a few: specific learning disability, mental retardation, speech impaired, seriously emotionally disturbed, and so on and so on. And for Section 504, all school-age children qualified as handicaps who have or have had a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits a major life activity. Funding for IDEA provides an additional funds for eligible students, and for Section 504 does not provide additional funds, and so on and so on. And this continues that. So, yeah. Parents as advocates. Usually parents do know their children best. However, using that knowledge to get services to help their children can be very difficult. Children may find information on how to become an advocate for their children the most quickly online. The Learning Disabilities Association, and their website is listed, has information for parents about the types of educational legislation in place, sample form letters to send to schools, and information about types of learning disabilities. Students' rights. Students have the right to receive due process if she or he gets in trouble in school. The student shall know the charges, be heard in defense of self, and has the right to review all documents that support the charges, be treated at all times with respect and courtesy by the members of the school staff, receive a prompt hearing if he or she is suspended or faces expulsion or involuntary transfer, expect a safe learning environment, receive a free and appropriate education, and be provided accommodations for his or her learning disabilities. So these are the teachers' rights and obligations. Teachers have a right to work in a safe environment. Teachers have a right to be treated respectfully by their students. Teachers have a right to be able to teach. Teachers have an obligation to notify parents before beginning the evaluation process to set up an IEP. Teachers have an obligation to follow the guidelines set forth in the IEP, and teachers should realize that parents have the right by law to access and have copies of anything teachers add to a student's file. So next we have the purpose of a behavior intervention plan, or a BIP. A BIP targets 1 to 3 of a student's undesirable behaviors with interventions that are linked to the functions of the behavior, and each intervention specifically addresses a measurable, clearly stated, targeted behavior. A BIP can include prevention strategies which stop the behavior before it begins, as well as replacement behaviors which achieve the same function as disruptive behavior without causing the disruption. Next, suspension and expulsion rights. In deciding whether a suspension is justified, the due process officer looks not only for the total... Oh my goodness, sorry, my mom is texting. For the total number of suspension days, but also how the school dealt with each infraction. Were teachers actually working with the student on behavioral goals? If so, how and how often? It is critical that teachers keep documentation logs. When students was referred to the principal for action, what action was taken? Were the nature and severity of the offense considered before suspension was invoked, and would another alternative have been more appropriate? Continued, when expulsion is being considered for a student, a pre-expulsion IEP meeting is held. At this meeting, 3 questions must be answered. 1, is the student appropriately placed? 2, is all FAPE paperwork up to date? And 3, is there a link between the behavior and the disability? The decision requires a FBA or a functional behavior assessment by a special